The sea had always been Lily Harper's safe place, until one night it started to feel like it was watching her. In the small coastal town of Seabrook, everyone knew everyone. Doors stayed unlocked during daytime. Neighbors waved from porches salted white by wind and spray. In the mornings, gulls screamed over the harbor, and the air smelled of diesel, wet rope, and fish crates stacked like old stories. Lily was 16, quick to laugh, quick to blush, and known for her bright, unguarded kindness. She helped her mother, Claire, at the bakery before school, slipping extra cookies into paper bags for kids who forgot lunch money. Her father, Mark, worked long hours on the water and came home carrying the ocean on his jacket, cold, sharp, and honest. Lily's younger brother, Noah, followed her everywhere like a shadow, convinced she could do anything. But like most teenagers in a town that felt too small, Lily also lived in a secret world behind her phone screen. It started harmlessly, messages from a man who called himself Evan. His profile picture showed a friendly smile and a tidy haircut. He wrote like someone older, confident, as if he knew the answers to questions Lily hadn't even learned how to ask yet. He told her she sounded mature. He said Seabrook must feel suffocating, and when Lily admitted it did sometimes, he replied, "I get you." Those words, "I get you," landed in her chest like a warm hand. At first, Lily kept it quiet because it felt like a private little miracle, someone who didn't know her parents, her teachers, or her childhood embarrassments. Someone who didn't remember the time she tripped at the school assembly. Someone who only saw the version of her that existed in the glow of a screen at midnight, when the house was asleep and the waves outside her window were a soft, steady hush. Evan's attention became a rhythm. A message before school. Another at lunch. Late-night conversations that stretched until her eyes burned. He flattered her, then tested her. He asked questions that made her uncomfortable, then brushed it off like she was imagining things. When she hesitated, he turned sweet again, apologetic, charming, reassuring. And Lily, wanting to believe she was in control, kept answering. The night they met, a thin fog rolled in from the water, swallowing street lamps and muffling sound. Lily told herself she was just going for a walk. She left a note that said she'd be back soon, heart thundering as she pulled on a hoodie and stepped into the cold. The meeting point was near the old sea wall, where the rocks were slick and black and the tide pulled at them like a quiet warning. Evan was already there. He looked older than she expected. The smile from the profile picture appeared, but it didn't reach his eyes. His voice was calm in a way that made Lily feel suddenly young, too young, and the fog pressed close around them as if the town itself had stepped back. Lily would later struggle to explain what happened next. Not because she didn't remember, but because memory can become a storm when fear is trapped inside it. She would remember flashes, the grit of sand, the bite of cold air, the sharp panic rising like a siren in her throat. She would remember how small her voice sounded when she tried to speak. How large the silence felt afterward. When she finally stumbled home, she moved like someone walking through deep water. Claire met her at the door, relief collapsing into confusion. Mark asked where she'd been, the question firm but not angry. Lily opened her mouth to answer, and then, for the first time in her life, couldn't find the words. Over the following days, the change was not dramatic like in movies. It was quieter. Worse. Lily stopped singing while she worked at the bakery. She stopped meeting her friends' eyes. She began flinching at sudden sounds, the clatter of trays, a car door slamming, the ring of her phone. At night, she woke gasping, fingers clenched tight around her own wrists as if she had to hold herself in place. And on the surface, Seabrook stayed Seabrook. The gulls still screamed. The harbor still smelled the same. The tide still came in, indifferent and steady. But inside the Harper house, something had broken, and no one yet understood how far the cracks would spread. At first, Lily's parents told themselves it was a phase. Teenagers changed. They withdrew. They slept too much or not enough. Claire blamed stress from school. Mark blamed the long, dark winter creeping in from the sea. They spoke in calm voices and gave Lily space, hoping she would come back to herself the way the tide always returned to shore. But Lily didn't return. She stopped going out with friends, then stopped answering their messages altogether. Her phone, once an extension of her hand, was suddenly left face down on her desk, powered off, as if it frightened her. When it buzzed unexpectedly, she jumped so hard her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Sleep became a battleground. Lily paced her room at night, counting her steps, checking the lock on her window again and again. When exhaustion finally pulled her under, she woke minutes later in a cold sweat, convinced someone was standing just beyond her door. Some mornings, Claire found her sitting on the bathroom floor, knees drawn to her chest, breathing fast and shallow like she'd run for miles. The first panic attack happened in the bakery. A customer laughed too loudly. A tray slipped and crashed to the floor. The noise echoed sharply, and Lily froze, eyes wide, face draining of color. She grabbed at her chest as if something inside was collapsing inward. Claire rushed to her side, wrapping her in flour-dusted arms as Lily shook, gasping, unable to explain what was wrong. That afternoon, they made the first appointment. Doctors came and went. Clipboards filled with notes. Words like anxiety, stress response, and adjustment difficulties floated through sterile rooms. Lily sat silently, hands twisting together, answering questions with nods or shrugs. When asked if something had happened to her, she stared at the floor until the moment passed. She tried once to tell a therapist about Evan. The words came out tangled and incomplete. She said she'd met someone online. She said he wouldn't leave her alone. She said she felt watched. The therapist nodded kindly but asked if Lily might be projecting fears onto someone who no longer mattered. Lily didn't know how to argue. She left feeling foolish, smaller than before. Then the messages started again. New accounts. Different names. The same tone. Sometimes nothing more than a single line, "I see you." Other times, longer messages that swung wildly between apologies and veiled threats. Lily blocked each one, hands shaking, but the relief never lasted. Every vibration of her phone sent a jolt through her body. The family reported it. They were told without clear proof, without saved messages, without confirmed identities, there was little that could be done. Advice was given: block and ignore, adjust privacy settings, stay offline for a while. The words felt neat and useless, like instructions written for a different reality. Lily's world continued to shrink. She stopped attending school regularly. Hallways felt dangerous, crowded with too many eyes and too many exits she couldn't control. She wore oversized sweaters even indoors, sleeves pulled down over her hands. She scanned rooms automatically, always searching for the nearest door, the fastest escape. At night, the sea turned against her. The sound of waves that once lulled her to sleep now felt threatening, too loud, too constant, like footsteps that never stopped approaching. Fog horns in the distance made her flinch. She taped over her bedroom window one evening, saying the darkness outside felt too open. Mark began coming home earlier. Claire slept lightly, listening for movement. Noah learned to knock softly before entering Lily's room, afraid of startling her. Still, no one fully understood what Lily was carrying. When her parents asked directly if someone had hurt her, Lily shook her head. Not because it wasn't true, but because admitting it felt like stepping back into that foggy night, where her voice had failed her once already. And somewhere beyond Seabrook, the man she feared remained faceless and untouched, slipping easily through the gaps of systems that required certainty, while Lily's life became defined by a constant, exhausting state of alert. The town carried on. The bakery opened each morning. Boats left the harbor at dawn. Neighbors chatted about weather and tides. And inside Lily Harper, fear settled in like a second heartbeat, steady, relentless, and growing louder by the day. By the time Lily turned 17, fear had become the organizing principle of her life. Her medical file thickened with each appointment. New professionals entered the picture: counselors, specialists, crisis line numbers printed on stiff cards and handed over with careful voices. Some listened. Some didn't. Most tried to fit Lily into boxes that felt too small for what she was experiencing. She tried medication. The side effects made her dizzy, nauseous, detached from her own body. When she said it made things worse, the dosage was adjusted, then adjusted again. Each change came with the same quiet hope from her parents that this would be the turning point. It never was. Lily began insisting the man from online was nearby. She said she saw him in parked cars, in reflections of shop windows, in the shadowed edges of rooms. When Mark gently asked how she could be sure, Lily broke down sobbing, not because she was sure, but because she couldn't prove she wasn't imagining it. The family went back to the authorities. They brought timelines. They described the messages. They explained Lily's panic, her sleeplessness, the way she jumped at every unexpected sound. The response was polite but distant. Without immediate danger, they were told, it was not an urgent matter. Suggestions were made about focusing on mental health support. The words stung. To Lily, the danger felt constant. The harassment continued in unpredictable waves. Weeks of silence followed by sudden reappearances. Sometimes a message would reference something recent, weather, a local event, enough to convince Lily that he was still watching. She started avoiding windows entirely. She refused to walk anywhere alone. One evening, during a family dinner, Lily suddenly stood up so fast her chair fell backward. Her eyes locked on the front door. "He's here," she whispered. Mark checked outside. The street was empty. Wind rattled a loose sign down the block. Nothing else moved. Lily collapsed into tears, humiliated and terrified. Claire held her while Noah stared, wide-eyed, trying to understand how an invisible threat could hurt someone this badly. Professionals began discussing long-term care plans. Words like monitoring and management entered conversations. No one spoke about accountability for the man Lily feared. The focus remained firmly on her reactions, her symptoms, her coping strategies. And Lily internalized it. Maybe she was broken. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe the night by the sea had ruined something inside her that could never be fixed. Winter deepened. Days shortened. Darkness came early and stayed late. Lily's panic attacks grew more intense, sometimes striking without warning. Her heart would race so violently she was convinced it might stop altogether. Her hands went numb. Her vision tunneled. Each episode left her more exhausted, more afraid of the next one. She started keeping a small bag by her bed, just in case. Inside were socks, a hoodie, her phone charger. When Claire asked about it, Lily said she didn't know. She just felt like she needed to be ready to run. The night everything unraveled began quietly. A sudden message appeared on Lily's phone after weeks of silence. No threats. No explanation. Just 4 words. You can't hide forever. Lily's breathing spiraled almost instantly. She paced the house, hands trembling, whispering that she needed air, space, distance. Mark suggested they call for help. Claire reached for her coat. But panic does not wait for plans. Before anyone could stop her, Lily bolted for the door. She ran barefoot into the freezing night, wearing only thin clothes meant for indoors. The cold cut into her skin like glass, but she barely felt it. Fear drowned out everything else. Mark shouted her name. Claire grabbed her phone. Noah cried from the hallway. By the time they reached the street, Lily was gone. The sea roared in the distance, loud and unbothered, as if it had been waiting. And in the minutes that followed, as the family's calls for help began, the systems meant to protect people like Lily would once again fail to understand the urgency, setting into motion a chain of decisions that could never be undone. The first call came in just after midnight. Claire's voice shook as she explained that her daughter had fled the house in a state of extreme panic. She emphasized Lily's fragile mental health, the ongoing fear, the messages that had pushed her over the edge. She begged them to understand, this was not a typical teenage argument or a cooling-off walk. But urgency was lost in translation. The situation was logged as a low-risk absence. Officers were not dispatched immediately. The assumption settled quietly into place: Lily would calm down and return on her own. Inside the Harper house, time stretched painfully thin. Mark drove the streets in widening circles, headlights slicing through fog that rolled thick and low from the water. Claire called Lily's phone again and again, each unanswered ring tightening the knot in her chest. Noah sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to every sound, flinching whenever a car passed. Hours slipped by. When officers finally arrived, their questions were procedural. Had Lily taken money? Clothes? Was there a history of running away? Each question felt like a misunderstanding. Claire pointed to the abandoned bag in Lily's room, the bare feet in the freezing night, the panic that had sent her daughter fleeing without a plan. Search efforts were slow and fragmented. No coordinated sweep of the coastline. No immediate alerts to nearby communities. Information about Lily's mental state, her vulnerability, her fear of the sea, her tendency to freeze rather than seek help, was not passed along clearly. Instead, attention drifted inward. Relatives were questioned. Tension rose. At one point, suspicion fell briefly on a family member, an unthinkable twist that left the Harpers stunned and furious. Precious time was spent chasing theories that led nowhere, while Lily remained alone somewhere in the cold. The town woke up confused. By morning, word spread that Lily Harper was missing. Neighbors joined in formal searches, combing familiar paths, calling her name into the wind. The cliffs overlooking the water were checked casually at first, just a glance, a shout, then moving on. It was a local volunteer who found the first sign. Near the clifftop trail, partially hidden by tall grass, lay Lily's hoodie. Not torn. Not damaged. Just placed there, as if she'd stopped and taken it off. Nearby, her socks were folded together. The discovery shifted the tone instantly. Search teams returned with urgency that felt cruelly late. Dogs were brought in. The cliff edges were examined more carefully. The sea below churned dark and restless, waves breaking hard against the rocks. Claire stood behind the search line, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched white. Mark stared out toward the water, jaw set, refusing to imagine what his eyes kept drifting toward. Noah clutched a neighbor's hand, too afraid to ask the questions forming in his mind. When Lily was found, she was not in the water. Her body lay in a shallow area near the cliffs, shielded slightly from the wind by rock. There were no signs of struggle. No injuries that told a dramatic story. Just a terrible stillness. The cold had done what fear could not stop. The official cause would later be listed as exposure to low temperatures, consistent with hypothermia. A quiet ending for a girl who had spent her final months screaming silently for help. The sea roared on, unchanged. And as the town of Seabrook tried to absorb the loss, a deeper question began to surface, one that would not fade with time. How had so many warnings been missed, and how many chances had there been to bring Lily home alive? Grief settled over Seabrook like a heavy fog that refused to lift. The bakery stayed closed for days. Boats remained tied in the harbor longer than usual. People spoke in hushed voices, as if volume alone might make the loss more real. Flowers appeared along the clifftop trail, weighed down with stones so the wind wouldn't carry them away. For the Harper family, time fractured. Claire moved through the house in silence, touching Lily's belongings as if they might still be warm. Mark threw himself into tasks, paperwork, phone calls, meetings, anything that kept him from stopping long enough to feel. Noah slept with the light on, waking from dreams where his sister was calling for him from somewhere he couldn't reach. Questions came quickly. Too quickly. Investigators retraced Lily's final hours. Reports were reviewed. Calls were logged and replayed. What emerged was not a single catastrophic error, but a long chain of small failures, each one seemingly minor, each one compounding the last. Why hadn't Lily's mental state been flagged as urgent? Why hadn't her history of fear and panic been clearly communicated to officers responding that night? Why had the initial assumption been that she would simply return home? An independent inquiry was launched months later, its findings devastating in their clarity. Lily had been known to multiple services. Her vulnerability had been documented repeatedly. Yet those details had fallen through gaps, between departments, between shifts, between definitions of responsibility. Warnings had been noted, but not acted upon. Reports of harassment had been minimized due to lack of immediate proof. Crisis calls had been handled as routine. No single person had felt empowered, or required, to say, "This cannot wait." The inquiry did not accuse individuals of cruelty. Instead, it painted a portrait of a system built to respond to visible danger, not invisible terror. A system that struggled to believe people whose fear could not be neatly demonstrated. For Claire and Mark, the findings were both validating and unbearable. They had known Lily was in danger. They had said it, over and over again. Seeing that truth confirmed on paper did not bring relief, it brought rage, sorrow, and a sharp sense of betrayal. Rather than retreat, they chose to speak. They told Lily's story publicly, carefully and deliberately. Not as an accusation, but as a warning. They described the slow unraveling of their daughter's life, the doors that remained closed, the night when urgency was lost to procedure. They pushed for change. Clearer protocols for missing persons in crisis. Better communication between mental health services and law enforcement. Mandatory consideration of psychological vulnerability in emergency responses. Some listened. Others grew uncomfortable. Progress was slow, but it was real. Training programs were revised. Policies rewritten. Lily's name began appearing in discussions about reform, not as a headline, but as a reminder. For Noah, the hardest part was understanding that none of it would bring his sister back. He returned to the clifftop once, standing where the grass bent toward the sea. The wind was fierce, cold, relentless. He imagined Lily there, confused, frightened, alone, and felt the weight of a truth that would stay with him forever. She had needed belief. And belief had arrived too late. In the years that followed, Lily Harper's name did not fade quietly into memory. It appeared in meeting rooms, policy drafts, and training sessions. It was spoken by parents who recognized pieces of their own children in her story, and by professionals forced to confront how easily fear can be misread when it does not look dramatic enough. Claire kept Lily's room mostly unchanged. The tape still covered the window. The small bag by the bed remained where Lily had left it, a heartbreaking symbol of a girl who had felt she needed to be ready to flee at any moment. Some days, Claire could not bring herself to open the door. Other days, she sat on the edge of the bed and spoke aloud, telling her daughter about the progress being made, about the people who were finally listening. Mark became quieter, steadier, shaped by grief into something harder and more resolute. When he spoke publicly, he chose his words carefully. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. The facts were heavy enough on their own. They emphasized one truth again and again: Lily had not been careless. She had not been dramatic. She had not wanted to disappear. She had wanted the fear to stop. The inquiry's recommendations slowly turned into requirements. Emergency responses began placing greater weight on psychological distress. Reports of harassment were taken with renewed seriousness, even when evidence was fragmented or incomplete. The phrase low risk was challenged, questioned, redefined. None of it erased the image of a barefoot girl running into the cold. None of it softened the nights when Noah woke up convinced he heard Lily's footsteps in the hall. As he grew older, he carried her story with him, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. He learned to speak openly about fear, about asking for help, about believing people when they say they are not safe. On the anniversary of Lily's passing, the town gathered by the sea. Candles flickered against the wind. The water below was dark and restless, just as it had been that night. Claire stepped forward and placed a small bouquet near the cliff top, waited carefully so it wouldn't blow away. She was more than how she died, Claire said softly. She was brave. She was kind. And she tried to be heard. The crowd stood in silence, the waves answering with their endless rhythm. Lily Harper did not become a cautionary tale meant to frighten. She became something more difficult, and more necessary. A reminder that danger does not always announce itself loudly. That fear can live quietly inside a person while systems debate whether it qualifies as urgent. Her story asks a simple, uncomfortable question. What happens when we choose not to believe someone who is telling us they are afraid? For Seabrook, and for those who listen beyond it, the answer is written into every change made afterward. Into every protocol adjusted. Into every moment when someone pauses and decides that invisible pain still deserves immediate care. And somewhere beyond the cliffs, the sea continues its endless motion, indifferent, powerful, unchanged. But because of Lily, the people left behind are not.